Good evening and welcome to 3ABN Live, and we're so happy that you can be with us tonight. And I'm joined by C.A. Murray, and recently we had the privilege, the two of us, of sitting down together with Dr. E.E. Cleveland down at Oakwood University. We had a tremendous time at Oakwood that entire weekend, and continuing on into the week with the Evangelism Council. And then we were able to get Dr. Cleveland to sit down with us and actually talk about his life.
Oh, yes.
And what an interesting life.
It was fabulous. And of course, as you know, this show actually sort of inaugurates a series that we're hoping to do, where we get to sit down and interview some of these men who are champions, who are pioneers, who have done great service for the cause of Christ. And I think it's fitting, Jim, that we begin with Dr. E.E. Cleveland, who is arguably one of the greatest living evangelists in the world, not let alone the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Absolutely. Yeah. And he was a pastor, an evangelist. Then he went to the General Conference, a ministerial association, was offered a vice presidency at the General Conference. He turned that down to go back to Oakwood, where he taught for years in the religion department and trained young ministers. In fact, there's a new building there on the campground, on the campus rather, called the Bradford, Cleveland, Brooks Leadership.
It's a wing off of the religion complex, and of course students are taught there. I had the privilege of sitting under E.E. Cleveland before I graduated. You and he became friends, so he's touched your life, he's touched my life, and thousands, literally, of young ministers through the years. And of course we talk about that in the interview. This is a great interview, Jim, an exciting interview of a man who's given exemplary service to the cause of Christ.
If you have ever known Elder Cleveland, you are going to really enjoy this. And if you have never heard of him or do not know who he is, you're going to enjoy getting acquainted with one of the great pioneers of this church.
Very much so.
Most people don't realize that when Elder Cleveland became a pastor in this church, we had fewer than 300,000 members worldwide. And then our church, it took it until about 1960 to reach the first million mark worldwide. And I believe that our next General Conference will be at around 20 million.
Just about.
And so that shows the period of growth that he was a part of. And that era, these men, Bradford, Cleveland, Brooks, Dedamore, Cox, and we can go on and on with evangelists, George Vanderman and all these men. They worked so hard, and they helped develop this church at a very crucial time in our history. And we want to talk about some of them from time to time. And I really will cherish the time we spent with Elder Cleveland.
You and I both have a very special place in our heart for men who put their lives on the line, on the front lines, as evangelism is, year after year, month after month, night after night, for years. And of course, Elder Cleveland has held meetings all over the world and baptized not hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of individuals into the Church of God. And we are very, very excited to introduce him to you all, because he's a great man who's done great things for the Lord. And as you listen to this interview, we pray that you will get insight, information, inspiration, encouragement, dare I say, to know that you can yield your life to the Lord and he can use you to do great things. Here now is our interview with Dr. E.E. Cleveland.
Dr. Cleveland, it's an honor to have you here today.
Well, the pleasure is mine. We are broadcasting in the very site of the birth of two of the three Cleveland preaching brothers. Now, I was born here in Huntsville, Alabama, up on Pulaski Pike, but I wasn't the first one. William was the older boy, and he was born in Decatur, Alabama. And Harold, the third boy, was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, all within a radius of about 100 or so miles. But what is interesting is that William was the older of the three of us, and he didn't know what he wanted to be in life as a profession. So my daddy sent him over here to Oakwood College on this campus to sit under one C.E. Mosley, a master teacher. It was about 3 months into the teaching experience that he noticed my brother drop his head while listening to the lecture. My brother didn't tell him, but he went home and called Daddy and said, "Well, Daddy, instead of a history professor, I'm going to be a preacher. Amen. I got the call today." Now there was dancing in the Cleveland household, and as William grew to be 2 years of age, Daddy said, "Well, I need a girl to go along with this boy." But before he could be so fortunate, Uncle Sam called him in 1917 into World War I. And so he had to leave the wife and the older son, 2 years old, and travel as far as the Argonne Forest in Germany.
This is your dad?
That's my daddy. Mm-hmm. And he was not touched or scratched when he got back here. So he said to Mama, "Now you need a girl to go with this 2-year-old boy." Mama, who always agreed with Daddy, was agreeable under these circumstances. And guess what? Out popped another boy. Now, this was before they could study who is coming with a machine. I was on the way, but they didn't know it. But they had such faith that Daddy said, "It's got to be a girl, it's got to be a girl." And they named the girl Earlene. Well, in the fullness of time, I stuck my head into the world. They say Columbus discovered America. I discovered Huntsville. Yeah. Daddy looked at me, and Mama says that he said, "Oh, shucks, another hard ankle. Yeah. We'll call him Earl instead of Earlene." So that's how I got this crazy name, Earl. Well, Dad is a man of faith, so he moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee. And he decided to try one more time to give Mama a daughter. This time, out comes a redhead named Harold. Daddy said, "Well, it must be of the Lord that I have a trinity." And so all 3 boys became Adventist preachers. But Daddy is the story. When he was drafted, they sent him up to Roanoke, Virginia. And he said, "I've got to tell them I keep the Sabbath." He postponed it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Well, I've got to tell them Friday. Well, Friday, instead of telling them, Daddy shined his boots, pressed his uniform, shaved, and did everything but tell them that he had to be off on Sabbath. Saturday morning, they sounded reveille. Everybody fell in the soldiers' language. And the general came riding down looking at the disheveled situation of these brand new recruits and using language that we preachers cannot use and get to heaven, until he came to my daddy. And he saw this finely groomed black soldier standing straight as ramrod straight, shaved, boots shined. He got down off of the horse, "Follow me, soldier," to the dais, and he put him up on the stage. And he lectured those 1,700 raw recruits. I cannot tell you the language he uses because I don't use it. But when he got through cursing those boys out, "To your barracks, soldier, and do what you should have done before you came out here. As for you, Cleveland, you've got the day off." And so my daddy went into town in Roanoke, Virginia. The saints fed him. he spent a day that his eyes would sparkle when he would talk about it. But he only postponed his problem. Next Sabbath, that was the crisis. He had postponed telling him again. This time a sergeant got him, took him out near a sand pit with a shovel. 6 soldiers with loaded rifles. And they said, we've got to teach you a lesson, or you die. When we give an order here, you obey, or you die. He told them to aim those muskets at my daddy's head, and of course they did it. Now he said, I'm going to put this shovel against your body. If you let it fall, the noise you hear will not be the shovel. It'll be those guns going off because you refuse to work on your Saturday. My dad stood there trembling and praying and praying and trembling. All of a sudden he heard a noise. He thought it was the rifles. Well, of course, he couldn't think if it was the rifles. So it turned out to be the shovel that he let hit the ground. Court-martial followed. I'll have to fast forward this one. Court-martial followed. 7 generals. My daddy with a Bible in his hand. All right, soldier. And these were the words of that general. Give us from that book a reason for the hope that is in you. Daddy was at home there. He started in Genesis. He thinks he got to Revelation. But some of the soldiers got tired of listening to the Sabbath, and they were dismissed. And the main man stayed around for the end. When Daddy got through, this general started laughing. Got up, came out to the desk. Sit down, Cleveland. Daddy sat down. And he sat down opposite him. Now, my father said that some of those generals could break your back looking at you. They had faced death so. And he said when the man got right up close to him like that and fastened those eyes on his, those gray eyes on his brown eyes, he said, I almost wilted when I remembered my real general. And I said, God have mercy, under my breath. And immediately I felt a backbone, a backbone asserting itself. And we sat and stared at each other. I wish I could tell you how long, Daddy said. He said, but the general wilted and started laughing. And he said, Cleveland, I left my wife and my daughter in the care of a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. I know what you eat and what you don't eat. I'm not surprised that you refuse to work on your Saturday. My nurse at home nurses but goes to church. It's in harmony with your Sabbath keeping. Now I'm going to write you out a meal ticket because I know what you eat. And as long as you are under my care, you're not going to have to go out on Saturday to do anything. You can go back into the mess hall and fix your own food. If anybody bothers you, flash your credentials. I've got news for you. Those orders followed my daddy all of the way through Oregon Forest when surrender took place and my pop came back without a scratch. Wow. It was then that they tried one more time, and out came a red-headed preacher by the name of Harold. So Daddy had and Mother had 3 Adventist preachers, William, Earl, and Harold. Harold became president of the Central States Conference, not Central States, Allegheny West Conference. Bill became president in Southwest region, and I became a resident. Now, we will talk about that as you ask me questions. 2 presidents and one resident.
I think you've sort of answered one question, and that is the kind of home that you grew up in. You grew up in a home where you had a father and a mother who loved the Lord and
Yes.
who stood for the Lord.
Yes.
So the idea of standing for the Lord and giving your heart and your life to the Lord was early put into your mind, into
Yes.
your heart, and into your soul, and that of
Yes.
your brothers also.
Well, I knew I was going to be a preacher from the moment of knowledge. And my daddy knew it too. Bill and Harold didn't learn that they were to be preachers till they got here and sat under C.E. Mosley, a godly instructor in religion. And both of them got converted listening to that man lecture. When I came here, I was already preaching. I was a boy preacher at age 6, my first convert. I got at age 6. There was a man, a buddy of mine, sitting on the on the porch reading the newspaper, the funny paper. I walked across the street and said, "What are you getting out of that junk?" That was my first sermon. He stood up, "What are you calling my paper junk?" Well, I hastily retreated to the shadow of my father, the giant shadow. And my friend said, "Your son just insulted me and called this junk." My daddy said, "Both of you come in here." And Daddy preached my first evangelistic sermon. Do you know 2 Sabbaths ago in Detroit, Michigan, I had gone over there to receive a few honors from Andrews University and stopped off to preach there. Do you know that boy that came over to protest my interference with his Sunday funny paper reading? And he said, "What's wrong with this?" And he got his first Bible study from my daddy. He's married to a Seventh-day Adventist doctor and fed me a great Seventh-day Adventist meal just before I came to the place that I had to leave to come to you, which is here.
Amen.
So 3 boys, 3 preachers.
3 preachers.
Yes.
So you began evangelism then very early in your ministry,
At
too.
age 6, I preached my first sermon on the funny paper.
Yeah.
And it hadn't been funny since.
Yeah. Now, after you finished college here at Huntsville, then you went out into the ministry.
When I came to Oakwood College, I had been preaching since I was 6, and the problem was I knew it. So I was very difficult to teach. Therefore, one of my teachers decided to play God and do what only the Lord can do, and that is subdue and inform and convert and change. When he found out that he couldn't do it, he passed the word on to the conference presidents, and they decided they would not try to do it. So for 1 solid year, now I was president of my senior class at graduation. I was a deacon in the church, so there was no problem with either my spirituality or my leadership. Somebody decided to play God and keep me out of the ministry until I demonstrated more humility. So like the Apostle Paul, for 1 solid year, I preached and I worked with my hands, but no president would touch me. But I had an experience similar to the Apostle Paul. He was on his way down, to Damascus, street called Straight, walking straight, riding that donkey, when the Lord smote him, and he hit the ground, lost most of his sight, and did the thing that any smart man would do, that got thrown from a donkey's back by the Lord. He said, "Lord, what wilt thou have me do?" Well, he didn't have to knock me off of a donkey. I couldn't even ride one. But I had a similar experience with Paul. I moved in with a colporteur, And that colporteur continued my education in prayer and in patience. And 1 year later, 5 days before I was summoned to go to the Korean conflict, I got hired. And it's been heaven ever since.
That's right.
Yes, brother. My wife tells me I laugh in my sleep.
Yeah.
I was so happy to get turned loose in pursuit of lost men.
Now, where did you first pastor? What district were you first assigned?
Fayetteville, no. High Point, North Carolina. I was so anxious to get started that I didn't ask the conference president about conference boundaries. I went down to a little old town called Asheboro, walked in on the principal, and I told him, sir, I conduct a series of socio-religio lectures in schools or wherever invited. You are in vacation here. How about letting me bring these lectures free of charge into this school? Reverend, we need something in this dull town. We need something. Boy, he didn't know what he was asking for. And I didn't know what I was asking for because the conference president didn't know where I was for 6 weeks. Well, how could they send me my check if they didn't know where I was? The truth is, they deliberately held my check until I could tell them where I was. 16 people got baptized down there, but the president said, Earl, that's not how we do it. We send you where you go. Do you know you've been in another man's district 6 weeks? I said, district, what's that? And from then on, I was learning the ropes.
Yes.
And from then on, Fayetteville, Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, I could do that 73 times. In God knows how many countries.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Lord just led me step by step, and I became more fruitful as I moved because my daddy had, I got to tell you this, my daddy had taken out some insurance on my humility. I was a boy preacher, as I told you, and I used to preach in other churches. And people would come and say, oh, little boy, what a guy, nice, good preacher. And they would flatter me. My daddy would never compliment me. Not even when I took him into the water, baptismal waters, in Greensboro, North Carolina. We baptized 117 people nonstop, one right after the other. I knew Daddy wasn't going to compliment me, but I said, this is the truth. I know I have worn him out today. He's got to say something good about what he saw. He's sitting there eating my wife's food and complimenting the food. Still hadn't said a word about the baptism. Only so tired he could barely eat, you know. And I'm watching him. Finally I said, Daddy, what do you think now? He stopped eating and he looked at me real hard. He said, well, you've still got a few rough edges. And went on back to eating. It's all I ever heard from him. He never said, you're good at it. He never said, boy, you're going to be a great preacher. This is what he said to me. He said, I don't want you to grow up shooting across the sky like a meteor, only to consume yourself in your own vapor. I have never forgotten that. Wait a minute, one more. He said, I don't want you to be like a spider spinning webs in the basement of the universe, made to be taken and destroyed. He said, I want you to ever know who is working in you. It is God that is working in you. He scared me so bad, brethren, of pride. That's what he was working on.
Yeah.
I learned. He accept no credit for the baptism of a soul. And he scared me so. Some people would get insulted years later. When I was in Trinidad, 1,217 people hit the water. Largest baptism since Peter preached at Pentecost in the Church of the Lord. I couldn't come out and brag about it. When people would come to me and said, hey, what's your secret? I said, I don't have any secret. It's been public ever since Jesus said, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. I said, that's me. Yeah, now you got a sermon you won't preach, I preach.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah.
A couple of things. One, and we're going to talk about that Trinidad meeting because that was.
You want to go back there?
That's a great,
I'd like to go back there too. Go ahead.
Great meeting. But obviously, early on, you felt the call. I mean, your brothers had administrative gifts, pastoral gifts. That was not where God was leading you. Early on, you saw.
I would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
As a treasurer. If it wasn't for my wife, you all would be talking to me behind bars, brother. No. One thing has dominated my thinking as it relates to my career, and that is another tent in another city with a sea of lost souls in front of me. Boy, I am at home. And I will never risk losing that consciousness that it is God that worketh in you,
Yes.
both to will and to do.
So God called you to a specific evangelistic ministry, not to pastor, not to administrate, evangelize.
I was offered the vice presidency of the General Conference the day I left there to come here. I said, Elder Pearson. He said, yes, Earl. I said, repeat that so that I can repeat it. He said, I'd like for you to stay here as vice president of the General Conference. Frank Bland was retiring, and I was the first man that he asked. And when he got through, I said, now, Elder Pearson, I am not the kind that can sit in a committee meeting 9 hours solving problems. You would run me crazy. I'm going to Oakwood where I can teach fellas to fish.
Yeah.
Right.
I said, Mr. Pearson, you know what I mean by fish? And he fell out laughing. He said, I knew you'd say that. Go ahead. That's how I landed at Oakwood. This was his school.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
And that has been my calling. I know why. I have the advantage of knowing why I was born.
Yes.
I wasn't born to be a treasurer. The conference would stay broke. Yeah, man. My wife, I told you, she takes all of my business, man. When she died, I had to learn how to make out my bills. And I still have a hard time. 2 + 2 are 4.
Now, I'm glad you admitted that when you came here, you were a little difficult because you had been doing this already. It wasn't as though some of us, when we go to college to learn what to do, you had been doing it already.
It was a gift.
Yeah.
And I knew it. But that could not excuse my going ahead after I was always courteous, but I would listen, but then I'd go right out and start doing the thing. Schneider, president of the division, worked with me in New York, and he tells it everywhere he goes. He says, I never hear Cleveland preach a sermon without making an appeal. He'll say it every time. Yeah, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I have endeavored to promote, is soul winning. And we leave it to men with other gifts to teach high finance and all of that. Just let me alone and I'll give you somebody to finance.
Right. Do you remember your first full meeting, your first full evangelistic crusade?
Do I? Huntsville, Fayetteville, North Carolina. I got to tell you something funny. During the baptism, now, after, by the way, there were 69 souls in the first meeting, and all of them were grown people. Back in those days, they put a premium on not baptizing kids. You remember that?
Yes.
Boy, now that brings something to my mind. I was sitting at a church one Sabbath morning, and I had to preach. And the lady giving the children's story was kind of long. And I'm getting impetuous there because I got to get into the Word. Now, I can see y'all have suffered through that too.
Yeah.
So when I got home, I complained to my wife. I said, couldn't they have left the children's story off so I could get at them a little earlier, you know? My wife said, now listen, there are 4 million kids in this church. You don't want to make them mad. I've been laughing ever since. When the kids come up, I just settle right down because they are an important part of our message. But yes, I have known since childhood that's what I was to be. And my first meeting was Fayetteville, second was Raleigh, and the third one is the one you want to hear about. Because those first two had the whole continent talking. That third one, you never heard about it until I tell you now. Because I didn't baptize but 13 people.
13.
What was wrong? That's what I wanted to know. So I went out into the woods. I put 5, I was telling Jim about this one, I put 5 Schlitz beer cans on top of one another. Now this is some way to talk to the Lord with 5 beer cans. I put these 5 beer cans, one on top of the other. Now I never could hit the side of a house with a baseball or a brick. If I were fighting, if I couldn't use my fist, I'd lose the battle because I can't throw straight. I said, Lord, my wife was teaching school. I'm out there in the woods. Beer cans, talking to the Lord, beer cans. Okay, so now, I'm sorry it wasn't something else. I wish I could tell you for something. They were beer cans. And I said, now, Lord, I'm going to Greensboro next year, North Carolina. Will you give me another 100 souls? I got scared after I missed my 100. 15, 16, 17, will you give me another 100? And that became my prayer. I said, now, if you're going to do it, let me knock these beer cans down. I cranked up like Dizzy Dean, kicked one foot up in the air. Bam! 5 cans rolled over in the bushes. I said, Lord, I don't want to trouble you. But if this you talking to me, let me do it one more time. Cranked up, bam! Beer cans hit the road. I did one more time. When I came out of those woods, son, I knew where I was going. Jehovah had spoken to me. The meeting didn't start like it was going to go like that, though, but I went to go. Man, we barely had a half of a tent full of people. But I put the people out on, oh no, man, that's not how this one's going to end. My wife went down one street with handbills. I went down with others. Eric Ward, who was with me in his training session, who built this big, beautiful church, he went down one street with his. Warren Banfield with his. 113 people were baptized in that meeting.
Praise God.
And the president came up. He said, I think I should ask you, where do you want to go next? Gilly, did you hear me?
I heard you.
Where do you want to go next?
I heard you.
I had achieved the status that I wanted to. I
Yeah.
could pick my town, boy.
Right.
I said, on the other side of town, there's another 113.
Wow.
H.D. Singleton said, you've got it.
Praise God.
We went over there, brother. 114 people got baptized,
Amen.
left that church bulging with people, and the church rolls on.
Got to ask you something, Elder.
Yeah.
Now, the Lord had showed you out in the woods, knocking down beer cans a year earlier, that he was going to give you 100.
Now,
You start your meeting, and you're looking at a handful of people. Did your faith waver, or did you know in the strength of
never.
what happened?
From
You knew
that
it.
moment,
Uh-huh.
Orlando, Florida, I had a big old tabernacle spread out there, you know, and Donald Williams, you know him. Donald Williams was my trainee. I always had some kind of trainee, and he was a trainee. Quite a preacher, too, as you know. Donald Williams just finished Oakwood, and I said, now, Donald, you start the Bible class at 7:30. You play just a little music until the people start gathering. Then you start your Bible class. He said, all right, all right. I rolled up there about 20 minutes to 8, deliberately slow, to see if my man was doing what I told him. 400 chairs, brand new chairs, sitting out there. One old man sitting on the front seat. Wait a minute. When I got in the back, Donald was pacing up and down back at the platform, just praying and praying. And I said, Donald, I told you to start the Bible class at 7:30. He said, where's the Bible class? I said, that old man that had to teach him a lesson. I said, that old man that's sitting on the front seat there. Donald Williams called me 2 nights ago, and he and I were laughing about this on the phone. I said, Donald, you went out there and you were kicking sawdust and raising so much cane. I said, he must have at least 2. And I stuck my head around the corner, and that old man was still rejoicing, enjoying himself by himself. That meeting ended with 118 baptisms.
Praise God.
Because we never turned it loose.
You know, sometimes when we're in ministry, we have things that discourage us. And I know that a lot of young ministers are going to be watching today. And I remember you sharing that out in one of your first evangelistic crusades,
Right.
You didn't understand you were supposed to keep the receipts.
Right.
And you've already said that treasury is not one of your strong
That's
suits.
right.
I think after that, maybe your wife probably took care of the expenses of the meetings. But
No, I was just baptized so many people they didn't
they
care
didn't care
anymore.
after that.
Said just stick him
Just-
up out there.
But then that treasure, that particular one, held off your salary until
That's right.
those were paid back.
And later on, they held off his, and at a time when he really needed it.
Is that right?
I couldn't. I wish I could say I was so righteous that I didn't appreciate the reciprocity. But
Yeah.
go to the next item.
But you continued to preach regardless.
Oh yes, yes.
Even when they didn't send the check.
That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
I want to just touch on, and we've talked about it before, it was 1964-65, and Jim knows that I know it, Queens, New York. You held a meeting there on the site where now the Northeastern Conference office now sits, and I worked in that office for a dozen years. I remember that meeting. It started the Jamaica, what is now the Jamaica Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about that great meeting during the World's Fair time. Yeah.
When Ora T. Hudson phoned me in Washington and said these words, Earl, I can't get a man in this conference to pitch a tent, no matter what I say or what I do. And I will not name the men, but you know a lot of them that were there. Some of them became presidents, and so but I mean, we're going to leave that right there. He said, will you come up here and run a tent meeting for me? I said, sure. That next summer, I pitched 2 big tents, both of them unfortunately, near a fire house.
There till this day.
And I don't want to tell that story of what happened when something caught fire. You know how we accuse the devil. I mean, the devil started a fire. We won't deal with that. These 2 big tents were standing side by side from the beginning. Oh, by the way, the ministers, most of them, went on a tour of Europe and left me with the rookies. Are you listening? Left me with the rookies. Some rookies. Alvin Kibble had never, he said, he told me, I will never be a conference president or anything. No, I'll never be an evangelist. I'm going to be a conference president. And he told me why. Bless your heart. In about 3 weeks, Alvin came to me, tears in his eyes. I guess I'll have to pitch the tent early, Elder. I'm telling you, old Al got it sitting in there. You see, these men had gone to Europe. The regular pastors were out of town. When they came back, Gilly, I had all of their members, all of the interests that their members had. Those 2 tents, you saw it, man. Yeah. You couldn't get up to the tents at night. And the baptism hit close to 500 people.
Yeah.
Now here's the lesson. Give them credit. After that, Bradford put up a tent. George Earl put up tents. Everybody put up tents. And that became one of the most fruitful. Isn't it true?
Very true.
You fellas,
Very true.
you fellas had everybody kind of scratching their heads. And before that tent was put up that he asked me to run, he said they don't believe that a tent will work up here. And that has been one of the most rewarding experiences. That's the one the president of the division came to.
Don Schneider.
Well, Don Schneider hit the streets just like everybody else up there. I mean, wonderful.
Yeah, it was a great meeting. Jim, I remember we were in Buffalo, New York, and we sang in a choir called the Emmanuel Temple Chorale. Yes. And they invited us to come down to give music one weekend.
Right.
So we drove all the way down from Buffalo, and I had never seen back-to-back tents like that.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get near those tents for the press of people. It was just packed, packed, and the energy and the excitement. I know about all this drama with the pastors being out of town.
Yeah.
All I knew is that there was somebody preaching, and the people were responding in droves.
Only the president
and droves.
and I knew one problem here, but he didn't have that problem anymore.
No.
And there's one other thing I want to say. Do you know that during all of this, with thousands of people jamming tents, there echoed back in my brain, I don't want you to be like a meteor streaking across the sky, consuming yourself in your own vapor. I had the names of too many men who did that to let it happen to me. And Jehovah knows it.
Amen.
I am afraid of him. And you know, godly fear.
Yes.
Don't play games with him.
No. And he will not share the credit with any of us. You know
Jim,
that.
you got it, boy.
He will not share the
He
credit.
will not share the glory with
No,
any man.
no.
Nor should he.
That's right.
Yeah.
Don Schneider now came out to that meeting, even though the seminary, I don't believe at that time, quite approved of his coming to that field school.
Quite
But-
approved.
Yeah, but there were
We
4
won't
students
tell
that
the
came out
story.
there. Okay.
But we know, don't we?
But Don came
Yeah.
because he's told me, and that this field school impacted his ministry.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
I believe Don was called just like you
Yes,
were
yes.
from the wound,
Yes.
but it impacted his ministry. He still talks about
He talks about
the
it,
impact
yeah.
of
Yes.
that particular meeting.
He's a personal friend.
And I remember about I think it was the year or two before then, I was at Andrews doing some work that summer. No, it might have been even a year after, but anyway, whatever. You were preaching in Wisconsin for the camp meeting, and I heard you were going to preach there. I got in my car, and I drove over there. My wife was staying that summer with her folks, and I was doing class work up there, and I went over and I listened to you preach Friday night, Sabbath morning, and then late in that evening, I drove you back to the airport so you could catch a plane after sundown.
Right.
And in fact, it might even been Sunday. I may have stayed over and we did Sunday morning.
Right.
But I remember that we visited and you talked with me.
Yes.
The impact that you had on my life, you will probably never really understand or
Bless
know.
you.
But I believe me, it had a tremendous
Bless you.
impact on my life.
Bless you.
And I got all of your materials. And I emulated a lot of your preaching style. I would start slow and I would build and I had a tendency to just take off preaching fast.
Yes.
And I saw that you paced yourself and you changed your pace.
Yes.
You would go fast, you would go slow.
Yes.
You would be conversational, and then you would become very oratorical in your preaching. And it impacted my preaching a lot. And the Lord has given me a few souls in this world,
Well,
and
I
I want
can-
you to know you
I can-
share in that.
I can tell you this, that you know that I have sense enough to know, and that's why you said the Lord impacted me.
Yes.
You know I know that. But then having said that to you, you talking about a good feeling when you shovel all of the credit where it belongs.
That's right.
See, God doesn't like big-headed people.
No.
He will visit you with a gift, and if you don't give him credit, he'll figure out the most embarrassing place where he would back off and leave it with you.
Oh, yeah.
And you go home and say, Lord, I'll never do it again. Just give me one more shot. You know what I'm talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
Of some of the conversions that you have witnessed, people who came to your meetings.
Hey, you just brought one back.
All right.
Martin Luther King.
Uh-huh.
Martin and I, we've got a lot of stories. But I was put in the General Conference the very year that Martin King became pastor at Dexter. In fact, I was planning to play hooky for that General Conference, but V.G. Anderson knows me. I worked for him. He made a special trip down there, and he said, Earl, I am not playing. I expect to see you at General Conference. Now, you know V.G. Anderson. He's a big, he's like Saul, you know. He's the Saul of the Adventist Church.
Yeah.
Man, it was then that I just, now my tent was already in town. I was going to wait till all those people got out there and put my tent up and started working on Martin Luther King and his people, you know, Abernathy and all them. I baptized 213 of Abernathy's folks and 27 McKean school teachers and all that. But there's a little story hanging around in there that I want to tell you all. But it's first GC. I go out there, and they elect me to the Ministerial Association of the General Conference, which is what V.G. Anderson had in mind to start. He said, you better be there. Yeah. Okay. Elder Anderson comes out to greet me. You know how wonderful he was. He said, well, Earl, he said, I wasn't expecting you, but welcome to the Ministerial Association. I didn't say anything. I just stood there looking at him, you know. He said, now you won't be able to run any more meetings. You'll have to just teach others how to do it. This is the first time I ever disagreed with my boss. I said, Brother Anderson, oh, yes, Earl. I said, I'm trying to get away from here now to get to Montgomery. My tent is waiting on me, and I'm getting ready to put it up. I said, I will be in that tent until January of next year. I said, you better go back in there and get you another horse. Now, he's Australian, and he does not understand American colloquialisms. You know what I mean? He said, what'd you say, Earl? I said, you better go back in there and get another associate. He said, I guess I'll have to come down there to see you then. I said, if you see me. And that's how we got started. We had a wonderful relationship. But that isn't what I tried to tell you. Man, when I got back to Montgomery, stuck my tent up, 517 baptisms. King just moved to town, and he and Abernathy had gone on vacation. He got a hurry-up call to get back to town. They said there's a sheep stealer in town, and all your members, they wasn't lying either. Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks.
Look, Rosa paid a visit to Oakwood College's campus after all this was over and said to Dr. Danny Blanchard, said, where's Dr. Cleveland? I understand he got on this campus. He said, but he's not here now. Oh, I'd hoped that I would see him. Those people sat there, man, like going to school. So one night, when I had given my benediction, I noticed a little huddle of preachers over on the sideline there in debate. Now, being a man of peace, I went over to join them. See? And it's Dr. King, just taking over Dexter, but Abernathy, older and with the First Baptist Church. When I joined the circle, Brown, Richard Brown, and Dudley were in debate with them. So when I got up, everybody stopped talking. So Dudley says, Dr. King, this is Elder Cleveland. King looked me up and down. He says, I'm disappointed in you, with that musical voice. So this was our first meeting. We met many times later. And I was in the Poor People's March and a few other marches with him, by the way. But this was our first meeting. And he says, I'm disappointed in you. I come to hear I come to hear that there's a black Billy Graham in town. And what do I hear? The law, the law. I said, Doctor, you must come late, because I always start my meetings with the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. I gave him 3 of them right back, see. No. Now, about this time, the habituates of the Tijuana nightclub on the corner, the opposite corner, they heard somebody was disturbing their reverend, you know. Only church they had was, and they're drinking that beer, and then they come and hang on the roof, say, let them have it, Rev, you know. It was a wonderful time, you know. They heard somebody's out there fooling with me. They didn't know it was King and Abernathy, the 2 biggest churches, pastors in town. They came out there, and when they saw the distinguished company, they put a circle around us to hear the debate. And this is how the debate went. King said, I'm disappointed in you. I hear the Black Billy Graham in town. And I come over to hear you, and what do I hear? The law, the law, the law. I said, Dr. King, you must have come late. I always start with the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. But since you brought it up, don't you teach the Ten Commandments to your people? This is word for word, mister. Christ is the norm. Christ is the norm. I said, correct. What he taught, or what he lived, or both? Both, he said. I said, thank you, doctor. Think not that I'm come to destroy the law or the prophets.
All right.
I've come not to destroy, but to establish. When I got into that, one of the inebriates, meaning one of the drunkards, one of the inebriates got between King and I, put his finger under that soon-to-be famous nose, and standing there swaying. That old boy preached better than I did. He said, Dr. King, I wouldn't want you to visit my home if I'm not there, if you don't believe in the Ten Commandments. And when that drunk dropped that one, Brown snuck out that way, I snuck out the other way. And the next time King and I met, we went to Poor People's March on Washington together. But now, but these are just a few of the occasions. But I got to tell you this. Did I tell you about the guy that flew to the field? Oh no, I did not. Joseph Henson. Have I used his name?
No.
Let me give you that story, and then you can have the conversation again. This, Dr. King. Can I do this one?
Yeah. You know what? Let's take a break.
That's right.
Want to take a break?
And then we'll come back
Okay.
and we'll pick up that story.
Pick it up.
So we'll take a little break.
These men, Bradford, Cleveland, Brooks, Dedamore, Cox, and we can go on and on with evangelists, George Vanderman and all these men.
yes.
They work so hard, and they helped develop this church at a very crucial time in our history. And we want to talk about some of them from time to time.
Oh, yes.
And I really will cherish the time we spent with Elder Cleveland.
Oh, yes. You and I both have a very special place in our heart for men who put their lives on the line, on the front lines, as evangelism is, year after year, month after month, night after night for years. And, of course, Elder Cleveland has held meetings all over the world and baptized not hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of individuals into the Church of God. And we are very, very excited to introduce him to you all, because he's a great man who's done great things for the Lord. And as you listen to this interview, we pray that you will get insight, information, inspiration, encouragement, dare I say, to know that you can yield your life to the Lord and he can use you to do great things. Here now is our interview with Dr. E.E. Cleveland.
Dr. Cleveland,
Yes.
it's an honor to have you here today.
Well, the pleasure is mine. We are broadcasting in the very site of the birth of two of the three Cleveland preaching brothers. Now, I was born here in Huntsville, Alabama, up on Pulaski Pike, but I wasn't the first one. William was the older boy, and he was born in Decatur, Alabama.
Good evening and welcome to 3ABN Live. And we're so happy that you can be with us tonight. And I'm joined by C.A. Murray. And recently we had the privilege, the two of us, of sitting down together with Dr. E.E. Cleveland down at Oakwood University. We had a tremendous time at Oakwood that entire weekend and continuing on into the week with the Evangelism Council. And then we were able to get Dr. Cleveland to sit down with us and actually talk about his life.
Oh, yes.
And what an interesting life.
It was fabulous. And, of course, as you know, this show actually sort of inaugurates a series that we're hoping to do where we get to sit down and interview some of these men who are champions, who are pioneers, who have done great service for the cause of Christ. And I think it's fitting, Jim, that we begin with Dr. E.E. Cleveland, who is arguably one of the greatest living evangelists in the world, not let alone the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Absolutely. Yeah. He was a pastor, an evangelist. Then he went to the General Conference, a ministerial association, was offered a vice presidency at the General Conference. He turned that down to go back to Oakwood, where he taught for years in the religious department and trained young ministers. In fact, there's a new building there on the campground, on the campus rather, called the Bradford Cleveland Brooks Leadership.
It's a wing off of the religion complex, and of course students are taught there. I had the privilege of sitting under E.E. Cleveland before I graduated. You and he became friends, so he's touched your life, he's touched my life, and thousands, literally, of young ministers through the years. And of course we talk about that in the interview. This is a great interview, Jim, an exciting interview of a man who's given exemplary service to the cause of Christ.
If you have ever known Elder Cleveland, you are going to really enjoy this. And if you have never heard of him or do not know who he is, you're going to enjoy getting acquainted with one of the great pioneers of this church.
Very much so.
Most people don't realize that when Elder Cleveland became a pastor in this church, we had fewer than 300,000 members worldwide. And then our church, it took it until about 1960 to reach the first million mark worldwide. And I believe that our next General Conference will be at around 20 million.
Just about.
And so that shows the period of growth that he was a part of. And that era,
and Harold, the third boy, was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, all within a radius of about 100 or so miles. But what is interesting is that William was the older of the three of us, and he didn't know what he wanted to be in life as a profession. So my daddy sent him over here to Oakwood College on this campus to sit under one C.E. Mosley, a master teacher. It was about 3 months into the teaching experience that he noticed my brother drop his head while listening to the lecture. My brother didn't tell him, but he went home and called Daddy and said, "Well, Daddy, instead of a history professor, I'm going to be a preacher. I got the call today." Now there was dancing in the Cleveland household. And as William grew to be 2 years of age, Daddy said, "Well, I need a girl to go along with this boy." But before he could be so fortunate, Uncle Sam called him in 1917 into World War I. And so he had to leave the wife and the older son, 2 years old, and travel as far as the Argonne Forest in Germany.
This is your dad?
That's my daddy. And he was not touched or scratched when he got back here. So he said to Mama, "Now you need a girl to go with this 2-year-old boy." Mama, who always agreed with Daddy, was agreeable under these circumstances. And guess what? Out popped another boy. Now, this was before they could study who is coming with a machine. I was on the way but they didn't know it. But they had such faith that Daddy said, it's got to be a girl, it's got to be a girl. And they named the girl Earlene. Well, in the fullness of time, I stuck my head into the world. They say Columbus discovered America. I discovered Huntsville. Yeah. Daddy looked at me, and Mama says that he said, oh, shucks, another hard ankle. Yeah. We'll call him Earl instead of Earlene. So that's how I got this crazy name, Earl. Well, Dad is a man of faith, so he moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee. And he decided to try one more time to give Mama a daughter. This time, out comes a redhead named Harold. Daddy said, well, it must be of the Lord that I have a trinity. And so all three boys became Adventist preachers. But Daddy is the story. When he was drafted, they sent him up to Roanoke, Virginia. And he said, I've got to tell them